Good morning, everyone. We are just getting started here. I'm going to give a couple moments for people who are probably trickling into the webinar. Thank you for joining us for the economics of integrity, trust, and revenue in the digital news ecosystem. We are very happy to see you today. We're very excited about the panel that we have arranged and people who have graciously made time for this from around the world. This event is hosted by the Center for International Media Assistance, CIMA, at the National Endowment for Democracy. And today our topic will be a quite challenging one: the dual crisis that is impacting news globally, the crisis of trust and the crisis of financial sustainability. Indeed, we find ourselves at a juncture where the supply of accurate, well-funded, and independent journalism is more critical than ever, especially in a year like 2024 with so many elections. Yet this necessity comes at a time of low levels of trust in the news media, declining engagement, and an uncertain business environment for news media. My name is Daniel O'Malley, and I'm the Director for Technology and Democracy at the National Endowment for Democracy, and it's my privilege to serve as a moderator for today's discussion. Previously, I served as CIMA's Senior Digital Governance Specialist, and in that role, I oversaw research that led to the report Digital Trust Initiatives Seeking to Reward Journalistic Ethics Online, which was written by one of today's panelists, Eleonora Mazzoli. And today's discussion is going to be broader than just those digital trust initiatives, but it's really anchored by the same kind of fundamental questions of how do we make sure that the digital transformation can help foster and sustain independent media globally. And given that NED is one of the largest donors in the media space, especially in some countries around the world, we really want to sharpen our thinking on this topic to make sure that our support is helping our partners address these issues head on. And we're so glad to have a great panel here because our panelists are at the forefront of addressing these challenges in different places around the world. And they bring a wealth of experience and diverse insights into how we can navigate and transform the digital news ecosystem. So before we get started, I just want to give you a brief overview of how today's event is going to run. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists in just a moment. And then we're going to have two rounds of discussions where we're going to get the different perspectives from our panelists, and hopefully they'll exchange ideas even amongst themselves. And then after those kind of two rounds of discussion, we've reserved about 20 minutes for question and answers. So I really encourage you to start thinking about what kind of questions or comments you would make. There's a feature in this webinar where you can add those questions. You can do that at any time. And then at the end, with 20 minutes left, we'll engage in that question and answer before wrapping up just around 11 o'clock. Some of our panelists need to have other things to attend to today. So that's how the session will go. Now, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Dr. Eleonora Maria Mazzoli is a senior policy manager at Ofcom and an honorary policy fellow at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Prior to this, she was a researcher at the London School of Economics and Political Science, where she got her PhD in data, networks, and society. And she was a policy advisor for the European Broadcasting Union and RII, Italian public broadcaster. Her academic and professional background is in digital media and platform regulation, broadcasting policy, and media economics. And one thing to note, while Eleonora is at Ofcom, she's today speaking in her role as a researcher. The report that she authored was before she joined that role, so she'll be speaking in that capacity today. Next, I have Chris Hajecki, who is the director of Internews's Ad for News initiative, which facilitates digital advertising investment in trusted local news globally. Before this role, Chris worked as a consulting partner at NewsGain, providing business expertise and strategic planning to help news organizations in freedom-restricted markets become financially sustainable. Then we have Paula Miraglia, who is the co-founder, director, and general and publisher of Gama Revista in Brazil. She also co-founded and directed for 8 years Nexo Jornal, a Brazilian digital news media outlet. Paula holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Sao Paulo and is a Sulzberger Fellow at Columbia University. She also sits on the boards of the Center for News, Technology, and Innovation, the International Press Institute, and the Paragon Black Reference Institute. And last, but definitely not least, is David Klimisch, the director of the Endowment Fund for Independent Journalism in the Czech Republic. Before that, he worked as a journalist for 20 years, and he studied media studies, economics, and history. He holds a PhD from Charles University in Prague, where he teaches journalism. So now that you have a better sense of who is with us today, I want to kick off the conversation with Eleonora. In your report that I mentioned, you highlighted a couple various digital trust initiatives. Could you discuss how these initiatives that have sprung up over the past 5 or 6 years are specifically designed to enhance the integrity and reliability of the news information system online?
Yes, thanks, Daniel, for the question, for the invitation as well. What we described as a digital trust initiative have emerged in this context that Daniel sort of outlined of declining trust, declining advertising revenue, and increasing spread of online dis and misinformation. And what I refer as a digital trust initiative, those initiatives that have developed in recent years, standards and indicators for quality and trustworthy journalism. And I'm using inverted commas because these are quite loaded and complex term. And these initiatives show how they try and strive to solve this key conundrum, which is a definitional one, or what does a quality and trustworthy news sources look like, and how can we define it? How can we transpose it into criteria that can be then developed and used widely as standards for the industry? And they all share, I think, similar goals. They all try and achieve and to improve basically the news landscape. And when I mean all, in the report, we actually focus on 3 main ones, which are the Trust Project, News Garden, and Journalism Trust initiatives, which have emerged as the main initiative in this space. And as I said, they all try and sort of navigate the online news environment by evaluating and labeling news outlets. They try and potentialize the prioritization, for instance, of trustworthy news outlets by promoting their indicators to be used by online platforms of advertisers, so they can be more visible, that this trusted, let's say, news source that can be more visible online, but also could generate more revenues and more reach. So their shared goals are similar, but the ways they try and achieve these goals to improve the landscape are very different, and solutions are also quite different. And each of them differs in terms of like approach and definitions of what is trustworthy. And the report sort of outlines the 3 main approaches that I can sort of briefly flag, and we can go more in details in the discussion. One approach is more of a collaborative approach to trust indicators and a focus specifically on media development, and it's exemplified by the Trust Project. And the Trust Project was actually the first initiative to coin this notion back in 2014. And their view is that we don't just need a rating system for news to say this first one is 100% trustworthy, this other one is like 0% trustworthy, but we actually need a more collaborative approach that helps news organization to reach higher standards when it comes to be more transparent and accountable in their editorial management and financing processes. And to do that, basically, the initiative goal is to help each partner news organization to achieve those standards, offer dedicated trainings, expert support. So while they do set some indicators, they help the news organization to reach them through sort of a collaborative process. And the second aspect, which is presents similarities and differences, is what I describe as an external labeling system of trustworthiness, which has more of a focus on media literacy. And this is exemplified by NewsGuard. NewsGuard has the peculiarity of combining more of a consumer-focused labeling and evaluation method, which is driven by sort of an expert assessment of news outlet, and provides a ranking system here to signal both trustworthy and untrustworthy sources. So whilst the Trust Project focuses on getting the news outlet to a trustworthy level, NewsGuard actually sort of assess it, what is out there, and they assess a wide range of organization, more than 8,000 outlets out there, and they have this what is called a nutrition label to characterize what you're reading, and it's very similar to a food, to the nutrition label of food, but instead of like getting calories or how much fat does a food has, they try and rate the news outlets, showing the level of again transparency of their processes, of funding and ownership, of accuracy of their content, looking at fact checking also some of the content that is published, the editorial guidelines that they have internally, and they're assigned based on this sort of external assessment system, a score 1 to 10, like a traffic light, where it's green, good, red, bad. Of course, it's more complex than that, but sort of gives the users a sense what you're reading if you're using their browser extension. So I forget to mention that it's like a machine readable code embedded in the browser extension to flag quite quickly, this has this score, this has another score, and the user should be more aware of what they're reading. So this is the media literacy angle of like trying empowering the user to understand what they're looking at. And the last one, last but not least, is actually quite peculiar and the first in its kind. It's an industry-wide self-regulatory standard developed by the Journalist Trust Initiative, and this is also a collaborative sort of standard setting process because it involved a very, very long multi-stakeholder process. But the uniqueness of this approach to ensuring trust out there is the fact that it's the first certifiable standard. So it's been approved by the European Committee for Standardization, and it is now operated by the Reporters Without Border, but it relies on a very external and independent from government and any other political interference system for evaluating and assessing the level of trust, again, news outlets. And what they mean by trust here is how news outlet respect certain standards of, again, transparency, of funding, ownership system, of accountability of their editorial processes. So do you have the right guidelines in place? How do you fact check and make sure that your sources are accurate? The independence of news outlets and the diversity of the content that they publish. So the intention is to basically help also publisher to reach those standards, but also make sure that that is feasible and certifiable, so that if advertiser want to invest in a news outlet that is done like complying with those high standards, they know what they're looking for. And if platforms want to prioritize or deprioritize certain news, they also know which one is certified and which one is not. So in a nutshell, there are very sort of three different approaches to this very complex definition, and we can go more in details into like what are the criteria, what do they mean by transparency, how do they evaluate it later in the discussion. But it's interesting to see how you can reach a similar goal through different approaches, basically.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that really, succinct explanation. And I think that is interesting. Is like we have similar objectives, but there are many ways to kind of go about doing it. There is a financial component to this, by creating these signals more broadly that, but perhaps more money can be channeled to independent media. And that's why I want to turn to Chris, because there's Internews' Ad for News has, is also working on that objective of how do we fund independent, trustworthy news, but it's a slightly different approach. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about, some of the market dynamics that have led to the creation of Ads for News and kind of what are the challenges or opportunities you've seen in that space. So first explain to us what Ads for News is, but then go into these deeper topics.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So just to start with a quick background, Internews' Ads for News helps advertisers invest in independent media by building large-scale inclusion lists of locally vetted news websites. We mainly serve programmatic advertisers, so it's quite niche, programmatic advertisers on the open web. And so it's just a piece of the puzzle. The main result of the work is a more transparent, brand safe supply path that encourages advertisers to spend more on the news that we care about, the trusted local news that we care about. We're in 54 countries, but not the US, and our list total about 14,000 news publishers globally. So to answer your question, I'd like to highlight a few key macro and micro market dynamics. And at a macro level, we see major brand stakeholders like investors, regulators, employees, and customers demanding that brands adopt more sustainable ways of doing business. And this is a powerful driver of our work. These demands have also resulted more recently in companies' growing interest in integrating responsible practices into their core business activities. And in our space, that's media buying. So in other words, brands are moving away from only isolated ESG initiatives and instead saying, okay, to satisfy our stakeholders and to have a real impact, we need to change the way that we operate our businesses on the day-to-day. So at a micro level, this translates into brands prioritizing more responsible media buying, primarily to reduce inadvertent spend going to disinformation and hate speech. And that's where we finally arrive at our bridge to independent media, because it's a great place for brands to avoid that bad stuff while supporting content that underpins healthy societies. So I would say, that may sound like a decent wave that we're riding, but there's three significant opposing forces that make things challenging. And I'll be very candid and frank about these. First and foremost, number one is the fact that the news website business model is under severe pressure. As we know, audiences and ad revenues are getting pulled away to other forms of media. And I think we've all heard about the Google, Meta, Amazon trio accounting for about 60 to 70% of online ad spend globally. But a more relevant framing for us is looking at walled gardens. So all of social, games, messaging apps, basically anything with a built-in ad ecosystem or garden versus the open internet. And in this comparison, walled gardens take about 78% in 2024, with just about 22% left for open internet websites, including news. And in 2027, only 17% of global spend will be left for open internet. So the pie is getting smaller for news. It's already small for news websites, and it's getting smaller. The second major opposing force is the legacy way of buying media, including the systems, KPIs, and monetary incentives that drive the ad industry to make decisions. And, without going down the gopher hole, we know it's all set up to make money for a long line of constituents. And the third major opposing force is the politicized stigma around news and the risky view that most advertisers have of news content. So I'll leave it there. Those are the positive market dynamics and challenges we're facing. Thank you. Back to you, Dan.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And thanks for kind of laying those out at the front, because I think these are kind of some of the issues we want to dig into. I want to turn now to Paula, because Paula, we've heard these different initiatives, and you come at it from a slightly different angle as a co-founder, director of a digital news startup in this challenging environment. So I was wondering, how do you perceive those as a news outlet trying to navigate this environment, and how has that influenced kind of your operations, your engagement with audiences? What does this mean for a news outlet that's trying to survive?
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Timo, for the invitation and for the question, because it will allow me to speak a little bit about our experience. Good morning to all of you that are here with us today. I think that I would start by addressing the Brazilian market, which is similar to many markets, media markets around in the majority world. We have a market that is extremely concentrated, very traditional, with a lot of barriers for new entrants. I think this is something that it's a description that could apply to several other media markets. I think that the digital possibility enabled a diversification of this market, but it doesn't mean that it didn't have, we still have a lot of challenges. So what you have is new digital-only initiatives that have benefited a lot from being digital native, so you don't have to go through the big transition, which I think the legacy players, not only in Brazil, but in many places around the world, it's amazing, but they're still facing it. After all these years, we still talk about transitioning entirely to digital, which I found insane, but it speaks a lot about our industry as well, and our pace regarding innovation and how open we are to innovation. So I think that the market itself poses a lot of, the kind of market that we have poses a lot of challenges to new initiatives. I think that the fact that we have relied, the industry has relied for so long on advertisement as its sole source of revenue or its main, and the fact that the margins were so huge, have in some sort of way spoiled us in terms of, as an industry. It put very little pressure on us to actually innovate. And we can blame the platforms, and we should, and I'm all for like pinning the responsibility in many ways, not only regarding advertisement revenue. I think they're responsible for the crisis we're going through today in many senses. At the same time, they are enablers of this digital diversification. They put us in a very vulnerable position today. But we should ask ourselves also as an industry, have we really innovated recently? In which ways? Are we truly revisiting our business models? And I would say that this is true for very few media organizations around the world. And it's really hard, because it's really hard for you to give up things that have traditionally been your like huge source of income to jump into something entirely new. There are risks, and when you're financially under pressure, it's very difficult for you to embrace risks. I think that also the fact that today we're mediated almost entirely by the tech platforms is something that brings challenges for our business model, but also from our editorial model. So what are we responding to the SEO, to the needs of our audiences, to our true interests? Because sometimes the audience is not interested in a particular topic, but it speaks to public interest to talk about this topic. So we haven't decided yet who we're serving right now. Are we serving the ranks? Are we serving the audience? Are we serving ourselves? Sometimes some media organizations, they're all about speaking, writing and publishing to people like they are. And I think we have seen that this also, it doesn't work. I also believe that, and this is something that we learn, trust is a huge issue. And we are going to speak more about that. But just to say, I don't think we have learned until today to navigate a very divided environment. I think that polarization is not even like a word that is enough to describe, like, we're divided. So how can we reconcile that? And I think that media has a responsibility, and we need to reflect about it as well. And I'll just finish quickly talking about innovation. I think that we have very little capacity to innovate, and I'll give you a quick example. There are two reports, one published by Luminate and the other one published by Purpose, that tell us that younger audiences, they inform themselves a lot in the gaming universe. While they're playing games, they're getting the information from social, political. So my feeling is that we should be there, and we should be imagining how we're going to occupy those spaces with news, for instance. But which news organization is capable of making the sort of investment to be on the game? It's just an example, but none. We're very much under pressure from a financial point of view. So there is not a lot of room for us to innovate. And I think it's absolutely needed. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to be able to respond to the financial challenges that we have ahead of us.
Great. Thank you, Paula. Lots of interesting things there to delve deeper into. I want to turn to David now, because, in the Czech Republic, and I want to, first, if you could explain to us kind of what the media rating tool is, how it fits into this broader components in your news environment that kind of led you to want to try and develop this tool and its functions.
Thanks a lot for this invitation. It's great for me to be here because, as Eleonora wrote in her report, these digital trust initiatives are still in their infancy. That's really a right example, even in the Czech Republic, with our tool called media rating. And only one possible thing is to talk about how to put it forward, what to do with it, to have a trust in these possible ratings or trust initiatives. Our media rating, I would describe it, it's close to NewsGuard from these three types of digital trust initiative, but still it's very specific, and it should be very specific because we talk about post-communist countries, in our case about the Czech Republic, and I would like to remind that our experience is like not only like a citizen, but like a consumers of news. This free media landscape, we have it only for 30 years or 34 years. It's very dangerous to be suddenly from authoritarian regime to digital chaos like we know it now. So it's necessary for us to provide some level of structure of our Czech media landscape, and that's media rating. So I would like to describe our approach. The first thing, maybe it's not typical in this digital trust initiative, is our first focus on original content, because our approach is that it's very important information for consumers in our media landscapes. What is with original content, with journalists, with editors, and these things. And to say it, well, this is the case, but this case, it's only some level of aggregate news server with some basic development of journalistic work from other sources. So it's important. This information is important even for many other organizations in the Czech Republic, because it's a tool that can say you, well, this is the media, like we talk about media with journalists, with editors, and these things. So this is the first thing. The second thing, it's very clear, is the focus on transparency of owner. Sometimes it's really hard to find who is the owner of some little local websites, but very powerful websites for some specific groups, for example. And then transparency of editors, who is the writer of these articles. I think this approach is right, not because I think so, but maybe you know about new legislation at European Union level, EMFA, European Media Freedom Act, and one of the part of EMFA law is to provide some basic level of transparency of media, not only like audiovisual or print media, but internet media as well. And the third thing, the most controversial, I have to admit, is our focus on content. And well, this is the never-ending discussion. What are the best criteria we should be focused on, and how to measure it, and if it's relevant or not? So our approach is to ask media or evaluate something we call sources. If there are links to sources you use, if there is enough sources you use for your story, it's elementary thing we think in our fund. The second thing is something we call facts. Not if these facts are good or bad or left wing, right wing, but if there are enough facts for basic picture of the problem you would like to write article or something similar. The third thing, I think the most important now in the Czech Republic, is something we call genders. if there is clear wall between news and commentaries, and we know on internet very blurring section. You don't know if it's more something like news or more something like opinion and what to do with it. We still think it's a very old school approach. It's not good to mix it and you should tell something to your viewer, listener, or reader at least. And the last thing, and this is the end, it's something we call adequacy, and it's if there is appropriate relevance of articles, especially if you see titles, for example. We can talk about the problem of clickbaits and soundbites, and it's about it. If there is appropriate relevancy in this article. So this is our approach. And again, I would like to mention that it's not final tool. And again, as Eleonora wrote in her report, these initiatives are still in infancy. Media rating is still in this position, but still I think I can think that after 5 years of this media rating, I can say it's relevant in the Czech Republic, and I would be happy to learn how to do something better or broader with our local initiative and how to cooperate with bigger and older initiative you talk about. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, David. I mean, I think it's a really interesting example because it goes to show how we're dealing with kind of a global challenge, but also the local context is really important, right? And you have people at the local level understanding these challenges in your information space and trying to develop, looking at different components. What would it be? How do we negotiate this digital ecosystem with these different players, with long-term issues around transparency, ownership, content, clickbait, making sure that, journalism takes money to produce, right? So if someone just, takes the stuff and captures the advertising, and not the original news outlet, how is this going to be sustainable? So it's really interesting. I want to turn back to Chris. You said you had 14,000 or 1,400 news producers globally who are in ads for news. You talked about some of the challenges, some of the really strong headwinds that are making this difficult. The pie is getting smaller, and also the need is getting greater, so to speak, to support independent media. I'm just wondering what kind of innovations you're doing and what kind of technologies you're doing. You have a really wide scope globally. How do you manage this? What does that look like going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just to clarify, it is 14,000 globally.
14,000.
We worked up to that from our beginnings in 2018 of about 7,000, but now we're over 14,000. I'll add, I'll confess that, there's a lot of missteps along the way since our beginnings in 2018. But I'll skate over those iterations because we don't have hours. Maybe save it for another discussion. But there's probably 3 notable strategies that have been really helpful for us, and along with those strategies, some underlying tech and approaches that have been helpful and may be helpful for others. Number 1 is we actively search for news websites instead of waiting for media outlets to apply for inclusion in ads for news. So this checks 2 boxes: inclusivity and scale. And to make our offering viable for programmatic advertisers, of course, scale is key. In practice, this means collaborating with a host of partners, local researchers, ad agencies, media associations, to identify as many potential news websites as possible in each country. And we welcome anyone to submit websites to the vetting funnel. So you may get a sense that we're firstly focused on identifying a diverse range of news websites and then conducting the vetting. And if you ask me, I would say, on the supply side, the value we bring is probably split equally between the identification process of that diverse range and then also the vetting that we do. Now, to enable this strategy and this very liberal sourcing practice, we do use algorithms and AI to filter through tens of thousands of domains in each country. This is to determine which are programmatically reachable and likely to be news websites. The second strategy is centered on media experts in country who understand the nuances of the news environment, the information environment, and it's these experts that actually evaluate the websites firsthand. Ultimately, this vetting work, all of this work is to conclude a few basic things about the website. In short, is the website published by a legitimate news organization? Does it employ journalists in the local municipalities? Does it publish news and information in the public's interest? And does the website avoid spreading disinformation and hate speech? The idea behind this is that we want to ensure the websites are legitimate without holding them to impractical standards, because I think we all have this sense that we have to consider that some of these outlets may just have 2 or 3 journalists. Certainly, resources are limited. They may not have the slickest websites. I'm sure we've all seen plenty of local news websites that are could use some adjustment. But the point is, they're doing a service to their community, and we want them to at least have a seat at the table when ads are served in their country by major advertisers. The third strategy is partnering with those advertisers that are really leading in the idea of responsible media investment or ethical media investment. And we found that with our partnership with Group M and more recently PubMatic. I think one of the most valuable aspects of these partnerships is collaborating on the development of the solution. So kind of during the development stages, collaborating with these demand side partners, because coming back to that bridge, we're building it in the ad industry. It's not in the media development. So advertisers will better understand how to make a solution practical. There's a lot of points we could talk about here. We collaborate on data, website identification. We work with demand side partners to select which markets we enter. So as I mentioned, we're in 54 countries. Some of them are huge commercial markets, like we're doing indexing in Germany right now, because it's a huge commercial market for Group M. But we're also doing indexing in Moldova, and it's not a huge commercial market, but it's somewhere where we can both have we can have an impact. And then there's of course emerging markets, huge growing internet markets like Indonesia and India, where there's opportunities on both. There's opportunities on both sides. And yeah, just to summarize, we cast a very wide net to identify news websites. We leverage algorithms and AI in the process. The final evaluation is led by in-country experts, and we work collaboratively with the demand side to find a feasible solution. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. I want to remind our listeners that we're going to have a Q&A session, and so if you want to, if you start having questions, use the Q&A feature, put those in there. We have a couple more interventions from our panelists, but then we're going to get to your questions. So I know, Paula, we've talked. We're going to come back to you. The crisis. We've talked a little bit. David mentioned a little bit about kind of the walls between commentary, the ways that businesses are set up. Other topics as well. What does this pressure mean for news outlets? As sometimes on the digital space, it becomes less clear, these traditional distinctions between the op-ed page has different people than some other page. It's all kind of content. Even in the branded content, you're not even sure, is it news content or is it just advertising content? So could you speak to some of these challenges? I think they intersect with the issue of trust, consumer knowledge of what they're consuming, as well as issues of markets and advertising and revenue.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think that when we talk about advertisement, we focus mostly on the fact that the money coming from the advertisement is scarce. But we should be discussing the ethics of it as well, because I think it contributes a lot to the crisis of trust that we have in journalism nowadays. I'm not entirely critical of advertisement. I think that we need to pay our bills. I have one of my Gamma is a publication that has advertisement as one of its sources of revenue. But it doesn't hold me from being critical about the use of advertisement in some cases. And I think it has to do with the fact that for a long time we have we said that the commercial department should be absolutely separated from the editorial department in media organizations, and they must be. But we need to talk that when we talk about revenue, we're not talking only about commercial, we're talking about business models. And it's completely different to talk about commercial and business models, because business models, they have an influence on your editorial model. So if your business model is basically entire in programmatic advertisement revenue, your incentives to produce clickbaits are huge. You need that audience. I'm not saying that everyone that adopts this business model produces clickbait, but I'm saying that the incentives, the need to have that audience is huge. And let's remind ourselves again that this is an industry that is very much under pressure. So you want to do that headline, you need to catch that click. So we need to think about our editorial models combined with our business models. Because when you have a subscription-based editorial model, you have an incentive to produce something that is unique, that you won't find for free on your neighbor. This is not, it's not simple, and as I don't think it's a simple equation, but I think it's something that we need to reflect in a more complex way. Apart from that, there are several other issues and problems, actually. So to give you an example, in Brazil, during the pandemic, we had more than 700,000 people that died in the pandemic here in Brazil. So it was a very sad health, social, and political crisis. The pandemic here was very much affected by misinformation. It was very much politicized. And however, many of the biggest legacy media players in Brazil published an advertisement that was sponsored by a medical association defending early treatment for the coronavirus, which was scientifically proven not to be effective. It was a political advertisement. It was spreading misinformation, and yet they published in a country where people were dying every single day. And their excuse to do so was the commercial side is separated from our editorial side. So, but what is your responsibility as a media organization, period? I don't care if like commercial, editorial, you have a public responsibility. So it's not okay. The same thing with branded content. When you have a huge website doing a branded content about vaping, I think we should, this is a discussion that is very hard to make because it addresses money, and people are not comfortable about talking that. And because I also think that the press is under so much pressure and being attacked, and the attacks come from several places, that we don't feel comfortable about making some reflection about ourselves or criticizing when we think it needs to, the critics are pertinent. I think that we have other examples. We have a big media player in Brazil who published branded content, a political branded content about the city hall during a very sensitive political moment. We could have this debate. Is this adequate? Should a media organization be doing this? I think we need to have this conversation, because my belief is this kind of thing is mining the trust relationship with our audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, I also want to mention Taboola and Outbrain. I don't know how, why are we not talking more about Taboola and Outbrain? We're talking about a crisis of trust. We're talking about misinformation, but then we have at the bottom of our web pages, content that is advertisement mixed with editorial, in some cases very close to misinformation. And the fact that they are so valuable is precisely because they're mixed with editorial content. If they were in an entire separate section, say advertisement, believe it or not, like if you want, but the fact they are mixed with editorial content is what makes them valuable. And the fact that a publisher decides to intentionally mix information that sometimes is not truthful with information that he himself has published surprises me a lot. I think, and we cannot say it is an excuse because it pays the bill at the end of the month. Because I think in the long run, is running the trust that our readership has in what we're producing as a whole.
Great. But we're going to
I
have
know
to.
my time is up. Yes.
Yeah,
sorry.
we're gonna, because I want to get to Eleonora and I want to get to David again, and we still want to have time for questions. So, Eleonora, a lot of issues have been raised here, but I think we should also recognize that there's a lot of government policymakers, different policymakers that are thinking about these issues, thinking about the crisis. How do you see different stakeholders evolving in this conversation, in the digital news ecosystem, especially in light of, legislation that's coming out of primarily Europe, the Digital Services Act?
Yeah, no, thanks, Daniel. I think this sort of picks up on some of the points that both Chris, Paul, and David were making. We're talking about a very complex problem, right? And the solution is not just one stakeholder doing something, but it's about readers, journalists, advertiser, platforms, and this digital news trust initiative coming together in a more collaborative approach and including legislator and policymaker in the mix to actually achieve this shared goal. Because one group of stakeholders by themselves will not be able to actually achieve systemic change. And in this sort of landscape, we see that legislators are also trying to find solution through different instruments, looking at what is happening basically, and trying to intervene. And it's quite interesting. And I'm looking specifically as an example to the European sphere, how through a different mix of instruments, they're trying to integrate this evolving landscape of trust indicators and trying to also sort of initiate with a bit of a regulatory push this virtuous cycles that also Chris was mentioning of having advertising investing in good content and therefore maybe helping good news outlet to not having to just invest on clickbait, right? If you got advertisers that are willing to invest in you because you produce not just clickbait content, basically. So like a virtuous cycle that includes all of it, and regulators are trying to initiate that because it hasn't happened so far without it. And an example, it looks at a combination of two things: the Digital Services Act and the Code of Practices on Disinformation at European level. For those who are not aware, the Code of Practice on Disinformation is a self-regulatory instrument. So it's been developed again through sort of a multi-stakeholder process and in the 2018, and then it was strengthened in 2022. And this 2022 version, basically the code encourages platforms and advertisers to use existing standards and indicators to improve their own prioritization and moderation practices, to know where to invest their advertising revenue, and therefore sort of monetize more reliable content and demonetize and deprioritize mis and disinformation. This is a self-regulatory code. It means that everyone is free to commit and abide by it and report on what they do, but there's no obligation, basically. So it has its limitation, as we've seen. And one way to evolve this into a co-regulatory code and sort of show a bit more teeth, it could be through the Digital Services Act, where, for those who are not aware, basically introduces a bunch of new obligation on varied online platforms, but it looks and minimizes some of the risk that we were talking about in the online sphere. And one of the possible mitigation measures could actually be look at improving moderation and curation practices and advertising monetization practices by looking at these indicators or trust initiatives. Again, this is all in theory and in discussion. The Digital Services Act is in implementation phase, so there'll be code of conduct that will be developed. So we don't know how it will play out, but it's interesting to see how different instruments could also be part of the solution if and as long as you have everyone trying to commit to this shared goal in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Eleanor. And then I'm going to turn to David quickly for a final comment before we get to the questions. Thinking about, the advertisers clearly as a private sector involved, actor here, platforms as well. But I know that you in the Czech Republic have also been doing work on, how can we mobilize, large private sectors to support an independent media, because an independent media is important for democracy, but it's important for a business community to have an informed citizenry as well. And I was just wondering, how does that, maybe it's with advertisers, maybe with other people in the private sector, what kind of movement or thought has this creation of a media rating tool had with those types of sectors?
Wow, this is a really complex question. Just I would like to start with something very practical. I've talked in detail about media rating. So, for example, this media rating is used by private companies, and they know how to place their advertisement. Maybe somebody work with Chris and as for news, and if they are not, so if they can use our tool. So this is very practical demand of private sector. And then broader answer is that I think that the private sector, not only in the Czech Republic, but in post-communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe, understand that they have to help civic society to do something with not only broken media system, but sometimes with broken democracy. Doesn't matter what does it mean in each countries. And I feel that private sector would like to help to do something with it. And obviously, to start to do something with media landscapes and free speech and these things, it's obvious focus. And I would like to remind our very short experience with democracy in Czech Republic and post-communist countries, and especially in media landscape. It means that we had an experience, I don't know, for 20 years of successful media business models. But now it's more 10, maybe more years of broken business models, not only in the Czech Republic, but in other countries as well. And that's not right. And I would like to support what Paula said, that it's necessary to find new business models, how to push forward quality press, and not only press, quality media forward, how to help them. Just one last remark is that okay, we have to talk about money, about business models, but at the beginning we should tell about our media landscapes, what is quality media, what is less quality media, and because of it, it's necessary to develop this digital trust initiative Eleonora mentioned, and I mentioned one local example.
Great, thank you. We're now going to turn to Q&A. My colleague Katarina Dutz has compiled some questions. Let's go ahead and maybe take 2 or 3, and we'll kind of dish them out to our panelists.
Great, thank you, Dan. I'll go ahead and read out 2 questions. So firstly, do you believe that solely enhancing public trust and thereby incentivizing citizens and advertisers to financially support news outlets would be sufficient to address the revenue crisis? And the second question, there are instances of content not being moderated depending on the language. What does this mean for diverse places where multiple languages are spoken? And how are trust initiatives reviewing content in multiple languages to manage ad placements on a global scale?
Wow, great questions. Does anyone want to take a stab at either the one on, if we just focus on trust, will that kind of lead to revenue? And then also the one that's obviously front of mind at the net is, we support news media all over. How can we make sure that it's not just the main 5 language globally where advertisers are probably most interested, where we can funnel, this type of revenue? Chris? Yeah, Chris, and then maybe Paula.
Yeah, I just take the first one. I think we see as I mentioned, that the news website business model is really under some pressure. So short answer to the question is no. I think even if we have, all the world's major advertisers funneling ad revenue to news, in the traditional sense to news websites. It will not be enough to sustain them. I think revenue diversification is key for any news outlet, digital, and incorporating all kinds of different revenue streams, events, sponsorships, and so on. I think that may be, the key for the short term, but there's some serious pressure, long term.
Right. Paula?
Very quickly, I would say no to the first one. I think we've seen all over the world, there are many initiatives, for instance, governments that try to cut taxes or give people the choice of using their taxes to subscribe to papers. I think we need to rebuild and rethink entirely the relationship of the audience with news organizations. I think that wouldn't be enough, unfortunately. And regarding language, I think that Brazil is a huge country, and we are a big market for the platforms, for instance. And I think that this has had an impact on the kind of services and new products that we have. I imagine the consequence, but I can see the consequences for other markets. So I think this kind of consideration is super pertinent.
Eleonora?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris and Paul on the first point. It is part of the answer, and it's not the only answer. But I wanted to sort of pick up especially the second question, to unpack a bit the two-part of it, because one thing is looking at language issues around content moderation and content curation practices, and that's on the platforms. And we know that has been a bit of a limitation because there are barriers, and the fact that these platforms are mainly based, for instance, in the US, and it makes it hard for them to pick up language nuances when they moderate and curate content. And the attention has been mainly on curators and like hiring curator in different countries to do them. The issues of language when it comes to digital trust initiative, I think it's a different one, because the NewsGuard Trust Project and the Journalist Trust Initiative do not speak directly with advertiser or platforms, but they're focusing on assessing and evaluating news organization. And of course, one of the arguments I'm making in their report is that, again, they started off in the US and in Europe, but they are trying to sort of expand and be more inclusive, also incorporating their system in different languages. For instance, the Trust Project has a Brazilian version, Projeto Credibilidade, but they also work across at least 13 different countries and then collaborate with local news organizations to produce their training programs in local languages. We see that the Journalist Trust Initiative as well, the main language at the moment is English, but actually they're now collaborating to translate their standards, but also working with auditors locally, so that if there's a news organization across the world that would like to try and adhere to those standards, they're able to actually be supported by local auditors in the process. And I think recently, at least in the latest 2022 that I looked at this, they were working with a wide range of countries from like within Europe, but also beyond Europe. And their goal is trying to make this global. But of course, like the language barriers, I think is a really good point. And the fact that they start off from a very sort of Western perspective, it is also an intrinsic limitation at the moment. But the more we talk about this, and the more I think the collaboration between the different aspects in different countries happens, the better.
Great, thanks. Maybe let's try to get two more questions. We're running up against time, and two of our panelists need to leave, but maybe we can get just one or two more in.
Great. So how can these different trust initiatives be applied to social media platforms such as X and Meta? And to what extent are the tech platforms included in the multi-stakeholder approach? And then maybe a question to end on. What are a few key steps each media organization can take now to improve trust and transparency?
Great. The first one, I want to hear, maybe what David and Eleonora have on this. I don't know if the tool you have in the Czech Republic interfaces directly, and then, I think that Paula and then perhaps Chris on that second one would have something to say. David?
It's definitely our ambition to evaluate even popular Facebook groups and some social media content, because sometimes it's more powerful especially with some specific echo chambers effect than some media outlets. So it's our future, and I hope we'll be able to do it. And of course, it would be a little bit different, but the basics, I talked about it. For example, transparency of owner. In this case, it means who is at the beginning of this group, what's the level of sources they shared in these Facebook groups, for example. I think that's the very simply question we would like to answer. We are able to answer. Of course, it's not the whole picture, but I think it's important for be informed in Czech media landscape. So it's definitely our ambition, but still, it's the future, and I hope this future will be very near to us.
Great, thank you. Eleonora, I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, and I think it's a sort of the answer is a bit twofold. On the one end, the fact that both the indicators of the Trust Project, the News Guard, and the Standard Certification of Journalist Trust Initiative have machinable read signaling. It means that their goal is, if those are appearing basically on search engine or social media, then user can easily pick it up. And the fact that it's machine readable means that it is in theory possible. The way it's being used at the moment is that we're not there yet. So to specification. On the one hand, for instance, NewsGuard has a browser extension that you can download and an app, but it's not integrated already in all the platforms, and nor are the Trust Project and the Journalist Trust Initiative. So it's not already there, but also because they're different of them, and at the same time, the platforms, you probably know it, but they all have their own definition of what is news, first of all, and what is quality, trustworthiness, public interest, authoritativeness, you name it. So if you actually look at the content policy guidelines of Meta, X, and the likes, they all try and broadly define this concept. They do it in slightly different ways. There's no sort of agreed definition. So they already define and trying to incorporate that into their moderation and curation practices, but it is a bit unclear how they do it. Some of them have collaborated with the 3 trust initiative that I discussed. So there is already signal for like collaboration in this space. They've taken into account this standards that have been developed, the code of practices that have been developed in this space. So it's not like they're not caring about it, but I think integration is still not there, especially if you want to scale it up and make it available. But there are different ways in which basically all this platform, including Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft, are actually using these existing criteria for their own products and services, basically.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Chris now if you have a response on either of those questions, and then I'm going to give the last word to Paula.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, on the trust indicator piece, and just maybe some tips for publishers. And I'll echo some of what David already said. First, make sure that ownership is transparent, transparently published on the website. It's even better if you have a published journalistic ethics policy, code of conduct, why you're doing what you're doing. That's a great trust indicator. A published privacy policy and user data policy is a good one. Simple things also like, ensuring that you have bylines and dates and authors' names on your content. Ensuring that you're producing some original content. Ensuring the content has some local relevance to, the flag that you're flying. If, the content doesn't match up with the particular community or the particular region that you're serving, this kind of could be a red flag. Paid content disclosure is a big one. So, if you're masquerading branded or sponsored content as news, it's kind of a no-no. So you want to make sure that it's clearly disclosed as sponsored content or a message from our partners, or however it's done in those markets. And then another thing is user experience. Just make sure your sites are clean, that the ads aren't too intrusive. They're not interrupting the user's ability to just consume the content. Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Paula?
Yeah, 2 points very quickly. I think one that Eleanor mentioned, I think definitions they are key in this moment. So what is journalism? What is public interest journalism? What people are questioning, what are facts? So I think that, I think David mentioned, referred to that as well. I think that we should be doing this. We shouldn't be asking the platforms to do this, and we should come up with those definitions. I think it's important for our industry to do that. I think that the Nexo was one of the first media organizations in Brazil to get the trust accreditation. It was very important for us. It didn't change our lives. So I think we need to like this jump, like, so are you going to be better ranked? And then there's the whole issue, and is a whole nother panel, like how much are people willing to change their opinion if they're faced with a content that doesn't support their previous one, which is another question for us to discuss. But I think even if it's a trusted content, is it going to be read it? On the solutions, I think there are many, but I would say that radical transparency is the way. So we used to make our decisions saying, would we tell this to a subscriber? If the answer is yes, we would do that. If the answer is no, we wouldn't do this. It is not very in terms of decision making, in terms of, and it takes you to a more horizontal relationship with your audience. You need to be more, you need to listen more, be more transparent about mistakes, be more transparent about your choices, be more transparent about your editorial model. So I think that radical, even about like when we got a grant, the first thing that we made was send a letter to our subscribers saying, we got this grant. We were very specific about the amount. We were very specific about who gave us this grant. I think it's better to be transparent than to be caught on some information that you like, you didn't, what is the reason you don't want to share? So I think that radical transparency is the way for us to regain trust.
Great. Thank you, Paola. And thank you, Eleonora, Chris, and David for a really fascinating and thought-provoking and challenging discussion about the economics of integrity. There are so many different variables here, different angles to take into account. And but I think it's an imperative for us to think about these and put these on the table as we look for kind of what kind of solutions are going to gain purchase and potentially help move this industry forward, because we know it's such a critical industry. Again, in this year of elections, we need facts, we need evidence-based information so that citizens can make informed decisions. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone, today. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.